Hi, I'm Randall here in Texas.
And I'm Matt here in Michigan. Today we're taking a look at a movie that is celebrating its 20th anniversary. This movie came out in 2000. It's one of the movies that kind of kickstart the modern superhero flick. Today we are talking about X-Men. So Randall, what do you think about X-Men?
All right, having gone through and done a rewatch of X-Men, um, I'm most impressed with how laid back it is in comparison to today's super crazy superhero movies. It was almost relaxing watching this as a superhero movie.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Didn't have to cram too much into it. Yes, there is action scenes in it, but it doesn't dominate the whole flick, I would say. There's some good dialogue. A lot of times, a lot of movies have like action or big, you know, powerful scenes or what everyone's saying, and then a joke is thrown right into it. This has some jokes and stuff, but really though, I don't think those jokes pick up until closer to the end of the movie.
Yeah, and it's at that point when the cast and the characters are definitely melding more, where the jokes make more sense than just how I just met this person. We're gonna make jokes now. Um, in particular, it's a classic scene where Wolverine doesn't like Cyclops. That's well known. He takes his claws and he smashes through the metal detector after he gets beeped on, and he pulls his claws back and just leaving the middle claw out. Like, nice, subtle.
Yep, and Scott, takes a joke, Cyclops takes a joke and just kind of like smiles and nods kind of thing with that.
Yep, yep. He doesn't have to. He doesn't have to snap back or anything. It was refreshing. It was an interesting rewatch for me. I remember seeing this in theaters when it first came out, and it was it was like nothing I had really seen before. The special effects hold up mostly well. There's a couple of spots where they're kind of iffy, but this is a movie where it's not necessarily special effects bound. The special effects are there to help the story along.
Yeah, I agree. And like I was saying, kind of intro, like this kind of like jumpstart, our like modern superhero flicks. Yeah, I think this is before Spider-Man came out. This is before we had the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I mean, heck, this was even before like the Fantastic Four, came out, in the early 2000s. The kind of the superhero movies that we had before this were kind of like you had Superman, and then you had like the Tim Burton Batmans, and then you had the other sequel Batmans
The
that
Joel Schumacher
kind of weren't
Batmans.
the
Oh,
Joe Schumacher Batmans that kind of weren't coming off too well. So this movie really kind of brought people back to the theaters and stuff. We probably don't get Spider-Man without this X-Men movie. So it's something like that. And watching this, I think this movie you know, holds up today with a lot of the themes, talking specifically about, racism and, powerful people in the government, trying to kind of, exclude, other races and stuff. I think it's a movie that's, prevalent today. As long as racism exists in society, I think this movie, kind of holds up.
yeah, definitely holds up for that. This X-Men is similar to Star Trek. I know I mentioned Star Trek again, but I have to. Star Trek's at its best when it's talking about relevant topics in the world. Uh, a lot of times they're political, but X-Men's almost the same. If you look at the strongest X-Men movies, this one and X2, and definitely Days of Future Past, they're at their core talking about excluding people. It's always been a foil for racism. Essentially, that's what the X Men was. It's like we can, when this X Men universe was built originally, they couldn't go out there and just make a comic about racism, but they could make a comic about mutants. it's always been a foil about difference and accepting difference. And when the movies take that and they do it well, there's your best X-Men movies.
One thing I want to talk about too about this movie, not just the themes overall of the movies, but also the cast in this movie. What an excellent cast! Some well-known names, some names that would become household names later. This movie kind of came out before some of their biggest ones too. And there's some casting choices that I don't think I could see anyone else really playing that role. One in particular, Hugh Jackman. I think this is one of the first films that I really remember seeing Hugh Jackman in, and he is Wolverine.
Yeah, and it's, we talked about this in our Q&A, which I'll post a link to above, but Hugh Jackman is just one of those characters where the casting was perfect. And it's a real interesting story. So another Aussie, Russell Crowe, who's one of my personal favorite actors, was offered the role of Wolverine and turned it down and pointed the producers over to Hugh Jackman. So it's like, wow, this could have been completely different, and it all turned out okay.
Yep, totally agree. And I like how they introduce a lot of these characters too, specifically, Magneto, showing flashbacks to him being a child in the concentration camps. It really shows you what his motivations are, why he is the villain that he is in this. It's one of those things, some of the best villains are ones that you kind of see their point of view. Not that you agree with it, you don't agree with their means, but you actually almost understand why they are the way they are. And I think this movie does a good job with that. And, Magneto, he is one of the best, villain in comic books. So I think they did that character real well.
Yeah, if we're talking about characters, and I'm happy you brought up Magneto as a villain, one of the things that the MCU is bad at, I really dislike it, is they have more or less disposable villains. Villain comes, fights the good guys, villain goes, most of the time gone, as far as we know. Now, some of it, Loki they kept around. Loki kind of went through his little redemption arc of sorts. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with the Loki Disney Plus thing, because that's bad Loki again. But in this, you can't kill off Magneto. He is the big baddie, and even when he's not being bad, he still has these memories of the time he was when he was a kid, when he was being persecuted as a Jew in the concentration camps. But you don't kill him off, and it makes him more relevant in the second movie. It makes him more relevant going forward. I wish the MCU did more of that.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. We only have a few in the MCU we have like Loki, and we have kind of like Killmonger, and we have Thanos. Those are really the only villains. Granted, I just named, 3 off, but of all the movies that we have in the MCU, those are really the only ones that stand out.
Yeah, and stand above, really, from some perspective. But another thing, if you're talking about characters, so Halle Berry plays Storm in this, and she does a kind of serviceable job. She doesn't get a lot to do. And then there's the worst line. It's the worst line. Do you know what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning, Matt?
The same thing that happens to everything else. It's so anticlimactic kind of thing. It's like, it's kind of hooky, like, oh, I'm going to have something witty to say.
Yeah, so I think that Halle Berry did what she could given what she had. She's not given a lot of screen time. But watching this movie, I like how they introduced Rogue, and I like how they introduced her character. I'm sorry, her accent is awful. She's supposed to be from Mississippi and does a very, very bad job of it.
It comes and it goes. The accent comes and it goes. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not there.
Oh my god, but if you go back and watch like the animated series from the 90s, Rogue has an accent, and she's supposed to, and Gambit definitely has his, Louisiana boy accent. Um, but I didn't mind what they did with Rogue in this movie. It did make me think, even without having rewatching X2 and X3, like, oh man, they missed the boat with Rogue's character. Um, they set her up really well in this, and then they just kind of let her go. And if you'd watched the animated series, she's a badass, she's just kicking everyone's butt, and in this series going forward, they really missed that opportunity.
I think really, like you said, this movie kind of sets up Rogue. I think you're supposed to, or the audience is supposed to identify themselves with Rogue a little bit in this one. I think this movie is probably aimed more at, those teens, maybe younger adults that have been reading the X-Men comic books, that saw the 90s X-Men cartoons kind of thing. And it's kind of like they were kind of show like, hey, this is, kind of what it means to be a mutant. I mean, it's, unexpected, you're kind of pushed away from society. You really feel like you are alone in this world.
Yeah, and it's interesting, though, because if that was their intention, they did a pretty bad job of it, because the way the script is written, Wolverine is the audience's entrance into the world. He's the one who has no memory. He's the one that doesn't really know what's going on. He's the one who gets, when things are being explained to him, it's really because it's being explained to the audience. So it's no wonder that we took Wolverine and identified with him, Because that's the way the script was written.
Yeah, there's a lot of exposition in this film. I think they're trying to explain X-Men to, audience that, isn't familiar with X-Men kind of thing. There is a lot of explaining, like, how the school came to be about, exactly like what the villain's plan is and everything in this. There is a lot of explaining, in this film.
Yeah, and there is, but it's interesting because there's also a lot of really good foreshadowing in this movie. Really early on, you see Toad spray painting something green, and you're like, oh, whatever. Only for it to later be important. Oh, okay. Now I see what he did with the Statue of Liberty. He painted it green. I get it. But yeah, I mean, you're right. But they go through and they set things up and like, oh, the bad guys are chasing Wolverine. They're chasing Rogue because of this, and then you get some exposition. But one other thing that I wanted to talk about is it's actually really refreshing to watch a movie where there's not a MacGuffin. They're not like chasing after something, It's a story progressing. There's not, oh, we have to get this thing or that thing like the Infinity Stones or the Infinity Gauntlet. Nope, none of that. We're just telling a story.
Yep, it was a good setup to like try to introduce people to this world, the atmosphere. I mean, it's not something that is solved in this movie. It's, the growing problem of, the coming war, whatever they think of mutants and non-mutants. It's something that's gonna persist and stuff. One thing I kind of want to talk about, there's been other X-Men movies that have come out and stuff. Of course, some, another timeline, I guess you can say, like Star Trek. We have kind of like another timeline going back with the Days of Future Past. We have some time travel, changing up history in some episodes. How do you think this movie kind of fits with some of the newer X-Men movies?
So this movie doesn't fit in very well with those, with what happens in the newer series with James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender. Also stacked casts, as it turns out, but it does so in a way where when you watch Days of Future Past, it's all retcon and it makes sense that it's all retcon. So these three movies stand alone, X-Men, X2, and X3, they stand alone by themselves as their own trilogy, more or less, and you don't have to worry about what happens after them. Just know that they're by themselves in kind of this bubble universe.
I would say, if you haven't seen X-Men and you're a fan of comic book movies and stuff, even if you're feeling like some of the current ones are getting a little stale, I definitely say go check this one out. If you like this video, be sure to give us a like. We're going to be doing a lot more videos similar to this, so be sure to subscribe and look forward to those videos. For now, I'm Matt in Michigan. See you guys.
I'm Randall here in Texas. See you guys.